Yeah, alrighty. We are on to week 118 of World War II, November 28th, 1941. Winter is here. The Germans can see Moscow. Dun dun dun! Hopefully my webcam does not break so I don't have to redo this intro again and again and again. I want to be done with reacting. Just go ahead and go through the video.
Deadline? What deadline? But what's happening after the deadline? What? Wait, what? What do you mean you've said too much already? I don't know. That guy.
Who's that guy? Who are we talking about?
November 28th, 1941. Back in June, Germany invaded the Soviet Union. Adolf Hitler saw this as his magnum opus, but in spite of legendary successes, it hasn't gone quite as well as planned. The Soviets are still in the fight, but this week, that may change. This week, German units can actually see the spires of Moscow's Kremlin. I'm Indy Nidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Germans renewed their drive on Moscow and made advances despite strong Soviet resistance and worsening winter weather. The Allies launched an offensive of their own last week, Operation Crusader in North Africa, which continues with heavy fighting all this week. The 4th and 22nd Allied Armored Brigades,
yeah, we got some action. Let's fucking go.
Pursuing Erwin Rommel's panzers, do not reach City Rezeg until the 22nd. By which time the enemy has reduced the 7th Armored Brigade there to just 10 tanks, and they have withdrawn southward. The new arrivals are themselves battered badly by German anti-tank guns. However, British Commander Alan Cunningham gets reports that Rommel is in full retreat mode. So Cunningham orders the whole of 30th Corps to join the pursuit, leaving just the 4th Indian Division to hold the border. He is unaware that 30th Corps now has just 44 working cruiser tanks, and the 4th and 22nd Armored Brigades just 54 between them. In fact, Cairo even broadcast to the world that Rommel is in full retreat, and American newspapers
Oh, he is he? Couldn't tell.
will report that half the German tanks have been destroyed.
Half? Whoa. Okay. I mean, I can't remember how many of Rommel's tanks were still working though. I mean, like, they may not be wrong with that number, but I don't think it would be because of necessarily the Allies doing the destroying. Might be more so just the Germans can't maintain their equipment.
Fighting that day, and the 23rd, around City Rezeg and the airfield there, is intense, bloody, and confusing, and does bring the Axis to under 100 tanks. Rommel's Africa Corps will call the 23rd Toten Sonntag, Sunday of the Dead, because of the heavy losses. However, the testing of men in war is cruel and searching, and one quality that separates the great general from the merely good one is a relentless probing for an opposing commander's weakness. Rommel will tell a captured British officer, "What difference does it make if you have 2 tanks to my 1 when you spread them out and let me smash them in detail? You presented me with 3 brigades in succession." At 10 a.m. November 24th.
It's like a villain monologuing to the good guy at the end.
In a surprise move, Rommel sends all of his armor, 90 tanks, away from the battlefield and racing eastward to the Egyptian border. The idea is to wreck the 8th Army supply lines and overrun the infantry. The night before, with 300 of his cruiser tanks knocked out, Cunningham thinks he's lost the tank battle that is the key to winning Operation Crusader, and he thinks withdrawal to his starting positions is his only option, and he even issues preliminary orders to that effect. His chief staff officer, however, thinking the battle can still be won, contacts headquarters and asks Theater Commander Claude Auchinleck to intervene. Auchinleck arrives that night and realizes that Rommel can afford his losses way less than the British can, and a disengagement would just surrender the initiative. So he refuses to withdraw what's left of the British armor, and in the morning sends an order to Cunningham: "You will continue to attack the enemy relentlessly, using all your resources, even to the last tank."
To the last tank, you say.
The danger inherent in committing his last reserves to an unfinished battle, which had gone well for the enemy, was great, but Auchinleck ordered the offensive to continue. As it turned out, Auchinleck's decision to fight on saved not only the battle, but much else. It was one of the great strategic decisions not only of the desert campaigns, but of the war as a whole.
Let me hear the argument for that, because, I mean, I don't. It's like, in my eyes, the African campaign for the Axis, by this point in time, is most assuredly doomed, and they are never going to succeed. It is mainly just how long will it go. Now, of course, had Cunningham pulled back here, could Rommel have perhaps wiped out some divisions? Maybe. Maybe. It's entirely possible. Um, but, like, I don't think it would have really doomed the African campaign.
This decision is as bold as Rommel's sudden raid on Egypt. Rommel is successful in hitting the 8th Army in the rear and comes close to finding the 2 supply dumps the Allied army depends on, but his forces are first outfought by the Allied gunners at Sidi Omar, and then they run out of fuel. So on the 26th, Rommel retreats to Bardia. But Bernard Freyberg and the New Zealanders are steadily advancing on Tobruk, as per Auchinleck's orders, and Rommel has to then head back there to maintain his siege. He orders the 21st Panzers West at dawn the 27th, and the 15th will clean up and then follow. Also on the 26th, before I forget, Major General Neil Ritchie replaces Cunningham as Army Commander, relieved by Auchinleck. So on the 27th, the New Zealand infantry links up with 70th Infantry, who have broken out of Tobruk at Ed Duda and take Sidi Rezeg and Bel Hamed, thus compromising Axis supply lines like I mentioned last week. The next day, the Germans try to sever the link between New Zealand and Tobruk units and retake the triangle, but the week ends before that can happen. And there's been a lot of action in the Mediterranean in general this week that is directly connected to Rommel in North Africa. 2 German ships, Maritza and Procida, are sent to Benghazi with fuel that is of crucial importance to the Luftwaffe. News of their journey is sent by top-secret Enigma signal, which is decrypted at Bletchley, and within a day, both ships are sunk. But Adolf Hitler has ordered submarines to try and stop British success in sabotaging Rommel's supply. On the 25th, one sinks the British battleship Barham. On the 27th, one sinks the Australian sloop Parramatta. But if the give and take is a bit confusing in North Africa and the Mediterranean, it is perhaps more so, and perhaps more crucial, on the Moscow front. Adolf Strauss's German Ninth Army is playing defense after securing bridgeheads north of the Volga, north of Moscow, so that Georg Hans Reinhardt's 3rd Panzers can advance eastward towards Klin. Erich Heppner's 4th Panzers made slow progress most of last week, until near the end of it, when they advanced around 20 kilometers by hitting the Soviets right between the 30th and 16th armies. On the 24th, Klin falls to Reinhardt and Solnechnogorsk falls to Heppner, and Red Army Commander Georgy Zhukov's right flank is in great danger. Advanced German units soon crossed the Volga-Moscow Canal at Dmitrov and Yakhroma. When the village of Peshki falls and the Soviets pull back to Kryukovo, General Konstantin Rokossovsky gets the order, Kryukovo is the final point of withdrawal. There can be no further falling back. There is nowhere to fall back to. The canal is now the last big obstacle before Moscow is surrounded from the north. On the morning of the 28th, at the end of the week, Reinhardt's panzers are not more than 35 kilometers from the Kremlin, and the officers can see its spires in their field glasses. As for Heinz Guderian's advance around Moscow from the south, on the 25th, the Soviets are pushed back to Pianitsa, a few miles from the river Oka Bridge at Kashira. Venya falls, and should Kashira fall, the road to Moscow is open. Major General Pavel Belov's cavalry corps heads for Kashira, and his orders, received at the post office where he sets up his headquarters, orders from Zhukov over the phone are, restore the situation at any cost. Until 3 p.m., the 26th, he thinks the Germans could beat him. But they have halted at Pianitsa. Belov is in direct contact with both Zhukov and Joseph Stalin. He plans a counterattack for 9 a.m. the 27th. By then, he's been reinforced with a Katyusha regiment, a tank brigade and 2 tank battalions, a rifle division, and even some militia. When his counter...
Hold on, let's look at that man's face card. Holy shit. Damn. Jawline. All right. Yeah, all right. Show off. I wonder if this was um uh, framed. I think that's. I'm blanking on the right word. Like a photo op sort of thing, where whoever the photographer was like, "Hey, which of you is the hottest in the regiment? All right, you're gonna get up here. You're gonna read. And we're gonna take a picture for morale."
militia. When his counterattack begins, the Germans are pushed back, relieving the pressure on Tula as the week ends. And even further to the south, things are not going so well for the Germans this week either. They are holding off the Soviet 37th Army, but the 56th and the 9th now crash right into them from east and south. The southern flank of the Germans is the River Don, but the Soviets attack right across it over a kilometer of ice. The 24th, the Germans begin to evacuate Rostov because of Soviet counterattacks. This is Army Group South Commander Gerd von Rundstedt's initiative, but has actually been expressly forbidden by Hitler. On the 28th, the Red Army reoccupies Rostov-on-Don. This is the first major setback the Germans have had on the Eastern Front 161 days after the opening of hostilities. As the week ends, the Red Army is clearing the city. There's also a bit of brighter news for the USSR up in the north. Leningrad has been under siege since September, and starvation has become a major issue there, with several hundred people dying each day. But starting the 22nd, they receive at least a bit of relief. That day, 60 trucks leave Kobona, and following tracks laid down by sledges, cross the frozen waters of Lake Ladoga.
That's so cool.
With 33 tons of flour. One truck and its driver goes through the ice. 6 crossings are made over the course of the week, bringing a total of 800 tons of flour. However, 40 more trucks are lost through the ice, and the Germans are shelling the road to the lake. Also, 350 trucks are abandoned in snowdrifts, but there are still around 2,500 trucks working this week, giving that city a tiny lifeline. Most of the world was super surprised when Germany invaded the Soviet Union. And there are now people trying to make sure they do not get hit by any other military surprises. On the 24th, the United States War Department warns all American commanders in the Pacific of the possibility of surprise aggressive movement by the Japanese in any direction, including against American possessions, the Philippines, and Guam. The next day, American Chief of Naval Operations Harold Stark tells husband Kimmel, commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, that President Roosevelt and Secretary of State Cordell Hull would not be too surprised if the Japanese launch a surprise attack somewhere. And in fact, Japanese troop transports are spotted off Formosa this day, making for British Malaya. Stark thinks if they attack the Philippines, well, it would be embarrassing, but he thinks they'll likely try to take the Burma Road, the main supply route for Chiang Kai-shek and the Chinese Nationalist Army, which would help Japan's ongoing war against China, now 4.5 years old. Kimmel has been talking to Walter Short, in charge of the defenses on Hawaii, about reinforcing Wake and Midway Islands, timing the operation with the next one of the reinforcement flights of B-17 Flying Fortresses to the Philippines in early December, so they can have some fighter protection, and so it doesn't look so much like they're just heavily reinforcing the Philippines with a ton of air power, which they very much are.
But they're doing it subtly. Very, very subtly. Totally. Entirely so. The Japanese have no idea. They won't see through it.
The U.S. has cracked a Japanese diplomatic code, as we've seen, though none of the naval codes. So they know the Japanese have a deadline of the 29th, originally the 25th, for something, after which, quote, things will automatically begin to happen, right? But what things?
Love it.
To break off relations with someone? To commit to war? But against whom? And where? The 25th, Hawaiian time, the Kido Butai, the world's largest carrier fleet, and 27 other ships sails from northern Japan, making its way to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. It is already November 20th.
Man, I wonder what they're doing. I think they just want a Hawaiian vacation. I don't think there's anything nefarious being planned. Nothing nefarious. Nothing Dastardly.
26 in Japan. On the 26th in Washington, Hull gives Japanese Ambassador Nomura what will become known as the Hull Note. This says a lot of things, which you should look up and read, and is a response to the 2 Japanese proposals received this month. It unequivocally says Japan must withdraw all military forces from China and Indochina if they want the embargo against them lifted and Japanese assets in the U.S. unfrozen or thawed. Right? There are those who call this an ultimatum, but it is not. There is no timetable for when anything should happen, and it absolutely does not have any or else anywhere. Let's also be clear. It does not say anything that Hull has not already said a half dozen times the past 2 months. In September, he told former Japanese Prime Minister Fumimaro Konoe that pulling out of Indochina was a precondition for any negotiations. As we saw, Konoe tried to persuade Army Minister Hideki Tojo to go along with this, but Tojo was adamant they were headed for war. Tojo is now Prime Minister, so that has not changed. On the 27th, the War Department writes to General Douglas MacArthur in the Philippines. Hostile action possible at any moment. If hostilities cannot be avoided, the United States desires that Japan commits the first overt act. That day, Stark issues to all commanders in the U.S., Asian, and Pacific fleets a warning of a state of war. And here are some notes to end the week.
Yay.
On the 22nd, in the South Atlantic, the German commerce raider Atlantis is sunk by the British cruiser Devonshire. Atlantis has been Germany's most successful commerce raider of the war, sinking over 140,000 tons of Allied shipping. On the 25th comes the 5th anniversary of the Anti-Comintern Pact, and it is now extended. The previous signatories sign it again: Germany, Japan, Italy, Hungary, Spain, and the Japanese puppet regime in Manchukuo. Wang Jingwei's Nanjing Chinese government joins already the 22nd, and Bulgaria, Denmark, Croatia, Romania, Slovakia, and Finland sign on the 25th. One of
Man, there's a pattern among all those nations, and I wonder what it is.
these signatories, Romania, concludes its ethnic cleansing of Jews, with tens of thousands now interned under dismal conditions in Transnistria, which is now more or less a closed, open-air prison state, right? For more on that, watch Spartacus's coverage of the end of November on our War Against Humanity subseries. And at the end of the week on the 28th, although for all intents and purposes the East Africa campaign ended many months ago, General Guglielmo Nassi and his 22,000 Italians surrender at Gondar
I completely forgot about the Italians there.
to the Allies, and Benito Mussolini's East African Empire has ceased to exist. And this week is now also finito. The Germans are drawing ever nearer to Moscow, but it's getting harder and harder. Do they have the strength to finish the job? The Allies and Axis in North Africa have both made bold strokes this week, but victory is uncertain for either side. And uncertainty is what everyone feels about Japan. They haven't been able to keep troop movements around the South China Sea secret, so writing is kinda on the wall that they're going to attack someone. But are they going to go for oil? Or are they going for tin and rubber? Because those would be different targets. Or the Burma Road. That's a really tough one to try to guess.
Lots of options.
I mean, Japan's war in China
Maybe
is
all
well
of them.
over 4 years old now, and is pretty much a stalemate. So maybe they'll move against the Dutch East Indies to get oil. Well, that would bring them into a war with Britain, of course, but British hands are pretty full war-wise these days, so that might work out. But that would mean sailing all those troops right past the Philippines and all those B-17 bombers the Americans have there. The U.S. is neutral, sure, but would you risk it? But I mean, Japan doesn't want to be at war with China, Britain, and the U.S. at the same time. I mean, that would be crazy.
Be stupid, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that'd be crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
The whole note.
And that was week 118 of World War II, November 28th, 1941. Winter is here. The Germans can see Moscow. A pretty good episode, I would say. I enjoyed this one quite a bit. Again, it was another one where there really isn't much anything to talk about. But what was being set up, all the stuff happening, was very intriguing. Go on to the next one. Aha.